And so we're bending and we're moving and we're shaping. And that's why most people going through life feel stress and anxiety and pains, and we get triggered. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the universe bringing to light, hey, there's areas in your life that you're still attached and you haven't let go and you're not free. And if you'll just let go of those things, you can be free. If we put as much attention into that, then we do the pursuits of the things we think that'll make us happy. We can all live a little bit more freely and happily and joyfully.
Some equate life to a movie, a play, a video game, or a holographic simulation like the Star Trek Holodeck or the Matrix. But how about an improv class? The cardinal rule in improv is to not negate the other, but to say yes and. According to Nicholas Kusmich, my guest on today's show, living life like this opens unexpected doors. Nicholas is a highly respected digital marketing expert who built a multimillion-dollar agency, and now he's making a radical life pivot. After a transformative experience with Therapeutic Psychedelics, he's announced his retirement from the marketing world to pursue consciousness work, facilitate healing experiences, and create a documentary called Unbecoming. He now helps people dissolve what he refers to as imprints, unresolved experiences that create mental static and block our natural state of peace and joy. In our conversation, Nick talks about his journey from pastor to marketing mogul to spiritual guide, exploring his philosophy of unconditional openness. He shares insights from living with monks in Nepal, working with indigenous tribes, and his experiences facilitating therapeutic psychedelic sessions. We examine how suffering stems from the illusion of separation and why releasing old patterns creates more freedom than acquiring material possessions. This episode may just shift your perspective on what true success means while offering concrete tools for dissolving the unconscious blocks that generate stress and anxiety. And now, on with the show. Nick, it's so great to have you on the show.
Stephan, I'm super stoked. It's been a while, and I know a lot has happened in both of our lives since the last time we chatted. So I'm just excited to have this conversation because I know every time we connect, we chat about some good stuff. So I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. And you were a guest, one of my early guests on Marketing Speak back in like 2015 or so. And here we are on another episode, but a completely different topic. And a big pivot for you, actually, because you are in a new phase in your life. And I'd love for you to maybe start by sharing the origin story, the superhero origin story of how you got here. But then, where are you taking this? And what are you leaving behind?
Oh, yeah. What a great question. So, the origin story, if we go all the way back, and I don't want to, before I was born, no, we're not going to go that far. But, I was kind of thrust into quote unquote entrepreneurship by accident. And what I mean by that is I'm an only child. My parents they're immigrants. They had a very difficult time making ends meet. My father had some health complications, and it forced me to kind of figure stuff out and say, how do I take care of my family? And I had to make that decision around 15 or 16. And so I made that decision. I got thrust into entrepreneurship. All the while, however, there was like this other side of my life that said I also wanted to make an impact. And so when I was juggling the two together, the one side that says I wanted to make an impact, the worldview of mine said, well, you got to go into ministry, because that's all I knew at the time. So at 17 years old, I became a youth pastor. At 19 years old, I became ordained and I started my own church. And the reason entrepreneurship was kind of in the mix of everything as well was because the church wasn't paying the bills and I decided not to take a salary from the church. So I had to figure out how to make ends meet over here so I could do this passion project over here. And so concurrently, I was pastoring a church and figuring out the entrepreneurship game. And I did that for about 14 years before I said, you know what, I need to take a step back from this ministry stuff. I thought it was going to be a year-long sabbatical, ended up being 14 years now, taking a break. But through that, as an entrepreneur, there was a part of me that always was saying like, is there more to life? What is asking the deeper questions that we always ask, right? Is there a God, if we want to call it that? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose? How do we be fulfilled? Because there was this reoccurring pattern that I noticed in my life was I thought that fulfillment came from the pursuit and the achievement of milestones. And so I got into entrepreneurship and I'm like, all right, well, I'm making money now. What if I just like buy that next car or buy the house I've always wanted or buy the thing that I always wanted to do? And so my life felt like this natural, undivided attention pursuit of happiness. And happiness could be reworded for love or peace or contentment or whatever you want to call it. But it was like pursuing these things. And so the means of entrepreneurship like provided a means for me to acquire stuff and to draw lines in the sand and say, if I could just be this person, if I can marry this person, if I can own this stuff, if I could say this, if I got 1 million followers on social, like so on and so forth, that all these little things out there. And then in the midst of all that, in 2018, in one of my mastermind circles, people started to talk about this idea of therapeutic psychedelics. And honestly, that just scared the shit out of me because I was a pastor and drugs are bad. And I bought into that whole like narrative. And so I'm like, oh, no, I don't want to do this and so on and so forth. And we let some time pass. And then a year passed. And then 2019, the opportunity presented itself for me to visit with a clinician with my wife and do a therapeutic clinical experience with a psychedelic. And at the time, I didn't even know what that meant, but I'm just kind of went in open heart, open mind and said, let's see where this takes me.
Wait a second. How did you go from I'm against this and it's against my values a year ago to 1 year later, you're like, okay, I'm here I am, I'm signed up.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very quick process, but every step of that year, it was talking to other people who've done it. It was questioning my own beliefs internally of like, why do I hold these beliefs? Why do I think it's bad? What's true about it? What's not true about it? And really going through this process of saying, well, you know what, worst case scenario, I discovered some things about myself that I don't like and we'll have to sort that out. Best case scenario, I'm opened up to a world that might provide me one step closer to some of these answers I've been seeking my whole life. And so I kind of weighed the pros and cons again. And this was over the duration of a year and talking to a lot of people and doing my due diligence and ensuring the people I was working with were, governed as much as possible, like the whole thing. I wasn't in some dude's basement somewhere. I mean, I made sure it was in a clinical setting with registered people, and all those things were just enough to check some boxes in the back of my head to say, this is okay. And again.
And when your wife was driving this, or were you driving?
No, this was, great question. So it was me, and I was like, okay, babe, we're going to do this thing. And she goes, what is it? And I'm like, I don't really know fully, but we're going to ingest a pill, and it's going to be like the limitless pill. It's going to just open us up to all these things. And she's like, what does that mean? I'm like, babe, just trust me. Let's go for this. And I mean,
you saw that movie, right? That's not a lot of fun for the limitless guy, right?
Yeah. Well, I honestly, that's not far from the exact truth of how I pitched it to her. And God bless her. I mean, she just trusted me and said, look, you've never let me down before. Like, let's go for it. You can hear her version of the story one day, and it's hilarious because, I mean, apparently a few minutes into the experience, she's shouting on the top of her lungs, Nick, what do you do? Why did you do this to me? What is happening here? I didn't sign up for this. On the flip side of it, it ended up being a beautiful experience for the both of us. But what happened after that experience was my mind was opened up to understandings and realities that I didn't know existed. Now, it doesn't mean it answered all my questions. In fact, it gave me more questions and answers, but that was enough to like spark something in me to say, like, what is going on here? And how does this correlate to this deep embedded inner knock that I have in my life that says like, search for the deeper meanings. My personality generally is to dive in 2 feet into something once I've discovered it. And so that was the beginning of another year-long journey of us saying, okay, well, what is this world? What are these molecules and substances? What do they mean? How do they correlate to bigger spiritual teachings and understandings and all this? Again, I'll fast forward a little bit. And then in 2019-ish, I don't remember the exact date, but somewhere around there, a year later, I had an experience with a particular molecule. And I know this sounds clickbait-ish, and it's meant to be a little clickbait-ish, but it's also my truth. I'd been a pastor for 14 years trying to understand God. And I had an experience with a molecule, which in less than 10 minutes gave me that experience. And my life on the one hand and my perspective was completely and utterly shattered. And it sent me on this like, okay, there's things I don't understand. And through that one molecule and that experience, my mind went to the place of clearly I'm not the only person or the first person to have ever experienced something like this. So it put me on a massive research path to say, who in the last billion years of this earth existing and millions of years of humans existing can explain what experience I had. And the short of it is, we started to realize that there was ancient traditions for thousands of years now who have put some sort of name and label and understanding to the experience that I had. And so I started taking those understandings and mixing them with a little bit of neuroscience to come up with my own kind of words to explain it all. But what that did was invariably, and getting to the answer to the question, shifted everything I knew to be true about life. And for 25 years, in fact, my identity had been wrapped up as a marketer. I mean, I was an online marketer. That's what I did. It's what everyone in the world knew you. That's how we met, right? And part of this experience started to question that identity. And saying, is that who you really are? Or is that just a costume you put on and an avatar that you display? And what would happen if you decided that wasn't the hat you wanted to continue to wear? And so one thing led to another. My wife and I started working in this space. We started facilitating experiences with this molecule. I started deep diving to the neuroscience of it. I started deep diving into the spiritual elements of it. I started to bring it all together, and I had been doing that behind the scenes while I was marketing for the last 5-ish years now. And then as of earlier this year, 4 weeks ago from the moment we're having this conversation, I made an official announcement that I've completely retired out of the marketing and the digital online space and I'm doing this now. And we were saying just offline before we hit the record button, like, how did that happen? And one of our deep principles that we live by is something that we call unconditional openness. And it's based on the idea that maybe, just maybe, the world, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, spirit, has got things figured out without our participation. Like, I didn't have to wake up this morning and will the planet to orbit the sun in its solar system on the right axis. The universe already figured that part out. I didn't have to wake up this morning and willfully breathe air into my lungs. The universe figured out how to give me a body that could do that automatically. And so the premise of unconditional openness is, what if exactly how life is unfolding in every moment that passes by is an invitation for us to say yes to whatever is unfolding in that moment? And my wife and I took the position to say, it doesn't mean we'll always say yes, but our default will be yes to whatever's unfolding before us. And opportunities kind of led to one another, and it said, this is the thing that you should step into. And it's also the reason why after a bunch of years, you reached out and said, shall we chat again? And my default answer is yes. The universe is unfolding in a certain way, and I'm not going to get in the way of it. And so that's kind of...
That's like living life like it's an improv class.
Yeah, very much so. Yes. And you're a character, and you get to decide what lines you want to say and how you say them and have fun and collect points and change the skins and have fun. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a very accurate depiction. It's an improv class, and you never know what the next second is going to unfold before you. But if you take a posture of saying, well, I'll be open to it, whatever it is, even if it doesn't align with my preferences and it feels uncomfortable, that's okay too. Because I mean, I have a whole belief system around what preferences are and how they ruin our life and all that. But yeah, I love the idea of an improv class and just enjoying the moment as it unfolds, just like we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I always talk about life being like a video game or a movie. You're like Truman in the Truman Show. You're the star. You're the observer. But I like this model of an improv class because, yes, and opens you up to so much potential. And another way to frame it, I like this one too, is the willing suspension of disbelief. We get so crotchety and set in our ways, especially as we grow older. And if instead we take a stance of willing suspension of disbelief, then again, we have that openness that you were talking about. And one other thing I want to share, that this is such a powerful small statement. I learned it in India. It was a Tony Robbins Platinum Partner trip that I was on, and these monks were brought in. And one of the key tenets or principles that I got from that, as well as an awakening experience, I actually had that kind of molecule experience without having to ingest anything. I just got a blessing. I got touched on the head by one of the monks, and I had a psychedelic experience of the divine. And the statement is this, it's very simple. The divine is an experience, not a belief.
Yeah, and there's so much depth to that. I mean, we could go on for hours, even just talking about that. Oftentimes, you'll hear some say, and nothing against any tradition or practice, because I think in the essence, every practice and every tradition and every faith and every spiritual anything is designed to bring people into union with the divine. But in the midst of that attempt, people then institutionalize and create separation with the divine and say, oh, I'm just looking for an experience with the divine because I don't have it and I'm separated from, and so I have to do these 10 steps to get reconnected to. And I think one of the most misleading understandings, it's just a trick of the mind, but one of the most misleading understandings is that at any point we are separate from the experience with the divine. I mean, the very fact that I am looking at a camera seems like, oh, this camera has form and it's a material object, which it does. And this is just like basic quantum physics. I mean, I'm not actually looking at a camera. I'm looking at quarks that are vibrating in a certain frequency, but I'm not actually even looking at that. It's electromagnetism that's creating this form and light bouncing off that's projecting something onto my mind. And the whole point, though, is like the foundation of every single thing that we can call an experience is, in fact, divine consciousness. And so to ever say we're not having that experience is a misnomer. It's just sometimes it could appear that way because we've got so caught up into our mind or our ideas or certain thoughts or beliefs that present themselves as separation. But that's actually not even possible, even if we wanted to do it. So I love that. I love how you shared the idea that the divine is not a belief. It is an experience in its purest sense.
And so if you think about like what would be an experience that got you into the track of becoming a pastor, what would that have been? Was there some sort of moment where you felt like this presence or this connection or this peace or divine guidance or something that told you or made you kind of more aligned with becoming a pastor? Because that's not an easy path, and it's not something that most people take.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And for me, it was the summer between when I was graduating junior high school, going into high school. I had been invited at that time to a church retreat, where they go away for a few days. And I was this young kind of, almost high school kid. And I said, sure, I want to hang out. And will there be some girls there? Yeah, I'll be there for sure. And I mean, it was very interesting because I was asked to help set up some of the sound equipment. And so I was doing that, and everybody left the room and left me for a few minutes to do that. I don't know where they went. And it was in the midst of just being there on my own that I had what I could only describe at the time as an experience with the divine. And when I say an experience, a more visceral experience. We're always having an experience with the divine, but this was more of a visceral, in your face kind of experience. And again, I don't know if it was audibly, but it almost felt that way, or if it was just really loud in my heart or being or mind or wherever the voice came from. But it was essentially an invitation to step into a different version of the life that I was currently living. And it was a life that said, an invitation to be more aligned, an invitation to consider others, a life of impact, if you will. And all the while, it didn't feel foreign. It lit up in me the very things I felt already to be true. And so in my own little way, with no spectacular fireworks or no Himalayan mountaintop or nothing, I made a decision to just say, like, yes, I will step into this alignment. And that unfolded in many ways. And at that time, I defined that as a conversion experience into the faith, and my initial steps into the role of ministry and as a pastor. But yes, very much so. It was... I believe everyone, if they're quiet enough to listen, can hear what I would define as an inner knock. Many different cultures and people define that differently. But for me, if everyone's quiet, and it comes in like really odd ways. I remember growing up, like watching a great movie, Christopher Nolan movie, let's say, and then the movie ends and the credits go up, and just for a moment, you're like glued to your seat. You can't move. And it's like, whoa, like, is there something more than the life I'm experiencing? Sometimes it's in holding your newborn baby for the first time. Sometimes it's at the funeral and the death of a loved one. Sometimes it's nothing more than going outside and watching the sunrise or sunset. And just for a moment, there's this like something inside that, I don't know how to word it, a calling, a knock, a hey, pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think if we're all on it, was that, sorry?
A synchronicity.
A synchronicity. I mean, there's something. And again, the words fall short. But if we're all honest with ourselves, we've all had some sort of an experience like that. And sometimes they're louder, sometimes they're quieter. But in each time, it is an invitation to say, are you fully aligned? Are you living the way you feel like you could be? And I'm not saying from a dogmatic standpoint, are you following the rules that should be? But like, I tend to say every decision that many of us make, in fact, every decision that all of us make in this life that we live, is in this pursuit of happiness. I just want to be okay here and here. And if I can be okay here, then life will be beautiful. And then we reverse engineer, and because of things that happened in our life, we have these imprints, and these imprints then start saying, well, in order for me to feel happy, in order for me to feel okay, in order for me to feel peace and contentment and love, these 10 things need to happen. And we define that. And we say, well, I need to get married, and I need to live in the Hollywood Hills, or I need to be in Malibu, and I need to see sunsets all the time, and the weather needs to be 75 degrees, and my kids need to listen to me and be grateful and adore me, and my staff need to. We have this list, and say, if just this list, if the universe can bend to my list, then I'll be happy. And so we literally reconfigure the entirety of our life to make sure that list is somehow fulfilled. And so, okay, I'll meet this person. I'll have this kind of business. I'll pursue this kind of career. I'll make this kind of impact, all with this idea of like, if I can get these things off the checklist, then I'll feel fulfilled and happy and love and contentment and peace. And then one of two things happens. Like, we get those things and we realize, I don't feel any different than before I got those things.
Or worse.
Or worse. Or we get those things and say, I need a new list. Like, I've got there, I don't feel really happy, so maybe it means it's the next list. And I encourage anyone to think that what we're looking for is not the things on our list. Hell, life will be really, really difficult if we are demanding the universe bend to our will to fulfill our list, because that's rarely going to happen. And then you'll be miserable if that's your requirement. But I encourage people to think you don't actually want the things on the list. You want the feeling you get, you think you will get if you get all those things on the list, which is the peace, love, contentment, happiness, and all that stuff. And if that's the case, then the reality says we don't need those things to feel that way. So instead, what if we just dropped the list altogether and went straight to source and had that experience irregardless of whether or not the universe lined up to our will and our little checklist of happiness? What would life be like then? And so that is kind of our pursuit. It's realizing that through life, we've had some experiences, and those experiences, if we didn't allow them to pass through us in a certain way, create these imprints, and those imprints create these mini lists, whether we recognize them or not. And those lists then lead to a life of seeking and resisting. I seek that which I don't have, and I resist that which I don't want. And life becomes stressful. But what if we spend some time just kind of dissolving and working on some of those imprints that have made themselves available to us, and then the seeking and the resisting dissolve. And if the seeking and the resisting dissolves, then we can just be, and it goes back to what we're talking about at the very beginning, then we can be unconditionally open to this improv class that we're in, and everything can bring us joy, because it's not actually the thing that's bringing us joy, it's the joy that's already there, and the other things around us are just enhancing it rather than taking it away. And that's kind of where life is right now. And we're hoping to, if anyone wants to join that path, like follow along in our little way to do it. But yeah. I ramble, Stephan, I ramble. I'm sorry.
You know, this teaching I learned from Kabbalah classes, I think is really instructive here. And that is that if you have the desire for something, that means that you already received the fulfillment. You know, because time is illusion, time, space, and motion is all illusion. We're just playing this game, this improv class. So if you have a desire for something, you wouldn't have the desire if you hadn't tasted the fulfillment. You wouldn't have a desire for some strange, exotic dessert that may not even appeal to you when it's described to you. Well, if you hadn't had the fulfillment of it, it won't appeal to you. And be like, yeah, I'll pass. That's okay. But if it sounds really intriguing and you're like, actually, I would like to try that. That sounds really good. You've tasted it in your whatever you're like outside of time and space sort of version of yourself.
Oh, I like that. Again, I think, yeah, if we can just rest in that reality, right, and just. How stressful is it to, I'm in the middle of finishing a manuscript for a book called The Pursuit of Unhappiness. And it's just based on this idea of like, how stressful is life when we feel like everything we do is trying to force the universe to align with our desires, because we feel like we haven't actually fulfilled them yet. And so we're bending and we're moving and we're shaping. And that's why, for the most part, most people going through life feel stress and anxiety and pains, and we get triggered and all these things. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the universe bringing to light, hey, there's areas in your life that you're still attached and you haven't let go and you're not free. And if you'll just let go of those things, you can be free. I mean, I think if we put just as much attention into that than we do the pursuits of the things we think that'll make us happy, we can all live a little bit more freely and happily and joyfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what did you do with your agency? So you have a marketing agency, you specialized or had specialized in Facebook, Meta advertising, one of the top experts in that area. What happens with that?
So right now, it's a great question because I'm in the thick of it. We are in two potential outcomes of that. One is to, unfortunately, and this is a lesson I've learned the hard way, we built that business so it couldn't necessarily be sellable. It wasn't an asset that could be sold because it's so heavily attached to the personality and the character of Nick. So we are in the midst of deciding whether or not we hand that off to a second in command and just let them continue to run it in whatever way possible, or just to literally close the doors and end that chapter altogether with like no residue, the whole burning of the Spanish ships behind us. That is a decision that is, and an outcome that is currently unfolding as we're having this conversation. So I don't know the exact answer just yet. All I know is that my involvement and my wife's involvement, who is very much involved as well, has come to an end. And the next chapter for the actual agency and that piece or body of work, we will see what the improv class brings to the table.
All right. Well, good luck with that. I'm sure
I appreciate it.
It's going to unfold the way it's meant to. So,
because it can't happen any other way.
That's right. It's all a rigged game. So you were in a movie. Why don't you tell us about how that came about and how that changed your life? And
so we're making a movie. And again, in the spirit of unconditional openness, there was, when we were still in the thick of our marketing business, somebody reached out to us and said, Nick, we'd love you to help us with the marketing of our business. And I said, well, talk to my sales team. Like, I don't really get involved in those conversations. So they talked to the sales team. They had these conversations. The investment to work with us and on that level was about 50 grand or so. And the guy said, I'm in. The founder of the company said, I'm in. But if I'm going to cut a $50,000 check, I'd love just for 7 minutes to talk to the guy. And I'm like, that's fair, right? You could do that. So we arranged a call for me to talk to this founder of this company. And the 7 minutes turned into 21 and turned into 40. And he's a very interesting character. He studied brain science in university and then started teaching it, and then realized that nobody wanted to learn academic brain science. Like, it was just like robotic, here's what the thing says about the brain and so on and so forth. And so he said, well, what is a better way for someone to have an experience with these ideas? And he realized that storytelling was the way to do it. Like, if there's a part of the brain that responds much better to storytelling than it does to academia. And so what if I just kind of like pursue this path of teaching through storytelling? And then one thing led to another. And then he picked up a video camera, and he was asked to support his friend at a wedding to shoot the wedding. And last minute, his friend bailed and said, I can't make it. You're on your own. You got to shoot the wedding. And he's like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I do understand storytelling. So what if I don't know anything about the camera. I don't know anything about cinematography, but what if I just shot this as though it were a story instead of just capturing moments at a wedding? Long story short, he ended up crushing the wedding industry. The NFL reached out to him because they saw one of the clips from one of his edits on a wedding and said, can you shoot something for the NFL? He ended up shooting for the NFL. Then the Four Seasons reached out and said, can you teach us about storytelling? And he's the only person on the planet right now who is the official storytelling guy, where the Four Seasons, many of the resorts invite him out once a year to come out and teach their team and do marketing and create assets for them and that sort of thing. And so he built a film business. And there were two sides of the business. One is teaching other filmmakers how to tell stories. And the other side of the business was shooting these documentaries for really high level type people. And so when we connected, I thought his only business was shooting documentaries. So I said, hey, do you shoot documentaries? And tell me how this works. And do you focus on influencers and people in the space? And he goes, I don't, but that's a great idea. And so we started talking, and he said, okay, let's engage in business. And we started talking about marketing. But in true storytelling fashion, he goes, I want you to meet with our story finder. And I said, what the heck is a story finder? He said, it's a woman who just asks you questions, because if we're going to work together, we want to know as much about you as you know about us, so that we can really build this marketing piece together. So I have this story finding call with the story finder, and she goes back to Patrick is his name and says, you really got to talk to this guy. I know we hired him for marketing, but he seems really passionate about this spirituality / personal development / neuroscience stuff or whatever. So we get back on another call and we end up jamming for hours on kind of like what we're talking about here. And he goes, this seems like A, it's really important to you, and B, a message that the world needs to hear from your perspective. Have you ever thought about doing a documentary around it? And I said, no, and it sounds expensive and it sounds like it'll take up too much of my time, so I'm not interested. But in the spirit of unconditional openness, one thing led to another, and we embarked on this journey of shooting this documentary. And what was supposed to be a film about personal transformation on one hand ended up being the greatest transformative journey of my own life. Because as part of this, we flew to Nepal and we lived in a monastery for a week with the monks and had debates with lamas. And we're going to the Morai tribe to live with an indigenous group out there to see what it's like to be in one with your surroundings and nature. And I'm flying to Imperial College next month or whenever this is being released, to have conversations with the leading universities and clinicians on the study of consciousness and the study of psychedelics, and all these things are now being studied in human trials. And it's taken us on this crazy, crazy journey, which inevitably actually forced, in the most beautiful way, the decision to retire from the marketing and to get into this type of work. And so the documentary is what I thought would be a little pet side project, ended up being the most transformative experience of my life to date, and is part of the reason why I'm before you now talking about this stuff and making this my life's purpose rather than digital advertising and marketing.
Yeah. And of course, it's another divine setup. You know, perhaps you collaborated with the creator on this before you even incarnated and made this your mission that you would just stumble into at some point.
Well, I was meeting a friend of mine in Austin, and we were texting back and forth, and I was going to meet him on a Saturday, Jesse Elder. And this was on a Thursday. And I said, hey, brother, I'm really looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. And he responds and saying, I remember us having a great meeting on Saturday. And at first I was like, what do you mean you remember us having a great meeting? We didn't have the meeting yet. And then it's like, I get it. And just like to what you're saying, Stephan, it's, maybe all of this has already kind of happened, and we're just kind of stepping into the invitation of it in our improv class as it all unfolds in this very strange thing that we call life.
Yeah, cool. And what's the movie called?
The current working title is Unbecoming. And the reason for that is because at the core, it is challenging the notion of what if life is less about becoming more, adding to who we are, adding to our character, adding to our avatar, adding to all these things, reaching all these milestones, having all these achievements, all the things life told us we need to do in order to feel better and fulfilled and happy and peaceful. What if the answer is not that, but it's unbecoming all the things that we added on to us that provided a veil on top of the true essence of who we are, the witness consciousness. And so the example or the metaphor I like is Michelangelo's David. You know, when someone asks, how did you know how to sculpt David out of that rock? And he goes, oh, that was easy. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David. And it's a beautiful metaphor to how we see transformation in life and experiencing, having a human experience. It's less about adding and more about subtracting.
Now, something I noticed, you never mentioned the name of the molecule. You just said a molecule. Are you doing that purposely because maybe it might get, I don't know, shadow banned on social media or on YouTube or?
No, actually, the reason, so I'll tell you straight up, it's 5-MeO-DMT. not to be mistaken with NN-DMT, and I can talk very much in depth about the differences of the two. Its nickname is the God molecule, whereas NN-DMT's nickname is a spirit molecule, and I think those names are very appropriate. The reason I don't usually bring it up unless asked, which I love talking about this, and so we can go as deep as you'd like, is because I just wouldn't want anyone to feel like it's the only path. Mm-hmm. And so I get really passionate when I talk about it because it was one of the tools in my path to discovery. And I think for the vast majority of the population, it is a beautiful accelerator that can take someone to a point of what I would call modern awakening, but it's not mandatory. And so I would just hate some real talk. When I look out into the world of psychedelics right now, all I see is another form of materialism with a halo on it. In other words, like materialism is the pursuit of material things in order to feel a certain way. And then what happens is when people get enlightened, if you want to call it that, from a psychedelic experience, are like, oh, I'm not interested in material stuff anymore. But they're in this unconditional, no end path. And every weekend they're going to another psychedelic experience looking for some version of awakening. And one thing leads to another, and they don't find it, and they look for the next thing, and they look for the next thing. And so the last thing I would want to do is be a proponent of spiritual masturbation, if you will, where people are just like, oh, I'm looking outwardly instead of inwardly for truth. However, I do have a particular bias towards 5-MeO, and I can talk about why. But that is 5-MeO-DMT, or AKA the God molecule, is the one both that had the most transformative accelerator. It was a catalyst for myself and my wife, and it is a molecule that we personally work with when we were facilitating experiences for people. Yes.
Right. And is it legal or illegal in the U.S. and in Canada?
Depending on, so it's state specific. Generally in the U.S. at large, it is considered a Schedule I substance. For those who don't know what that means, it's illegal to own, possess, trade, whatever fits into that category. In Canada, and particularly in the province that I'm in BC, it is not scheduled. It doesn't mean it's perfectly legal, but you are allowed to possess and own and have and self-administer it here, yes. And
there are clinics and there are shamans and stuff that are in North America that provide an experience with that molecule, right?
Clinics, no, because of the fact that it is not considered on the list of substances being considered for taking off schedules. Now, the three main substances right now that are in consideration, although the FDA shut that down earlier this year and set the industry back a bunch of years, is MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin, used heavily for PTSD and things in clinical therapy. So there's a lot going on there. But you could go to many places in the US, for example, and find a ketamine clinic that is sanctioned by the government, prescribed by a doctor, fulfilled by a compounding pharmacy, and it is completely above board under the conditions you meet all the requirements there. Psilocybin and MDMA are a little bit different. Even though federally they're considered Schedule I's, there are certain states that are allowing for it in certain therapeutic senses, which is a very weird thing because federally you're not allowed to, but statewide you are. And so there's what might be known as like shadow clinics of people who are, let's call it gray. You can't really legally be upfront about what you're doing there. But again, it's because it's being considered on some levels in specific states, you can still have those types of things. The interesting thing about 5-MeO in particular is it is a fairly new molecule, meaning there is no ancient historical indigenous cultural use of it. Now there's a little bit, there's certain tribes that used it in snuffs when mixing it with other things. And that's the plant version of it. But 5-MeO has really come on the scene in the 80s. It's mostly used in neo-shamanistic practices, meaning no cultural or heavy indigenous use. It's the neo shaman, the modern day shaman, who says this is how we're going to use it. So it is a very interesting molecule in that sense, where there's no cultural ties per se, there's no clinical ties, and there's no long history of usage with it, particularly in the organic, non-synthetic version of it. So it's a very interesting one that, again, people have to consider with a lot of care, for example. And secondly, it is known in many circles as the most potent molecule or psychedelic on the planet. So it is definitely not one to be taken lightly.
Right. And does your brain make that molecule?
It is endogenous to the brain in trace amounts. So it is in your brain already, which is why a 5-MeO experience vaporized is a 8 to 20 minute experience. And there's various reasons for that. But one of the reasons is because it is endogenous to the brain and your body knows how to metabolize it naturally. So it doesn't necessarily see it as a foreign substance, and it has the ability to metabolize it. So it is in trace elements in your brain currently, yes.
Yeah. And you can make more of it, right? By doing, let's say, breath work exercises, getting into deep kind of trance.
Meditative type states, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are ways, and there's many teachings out there, whether it be breath work, whether it be certain forms of yogic meditations that can draw onto that. Even Dispenza has some pineal gland type exercises that try to activate it even more. So there are ways to, let's say, increase it from an additional standpoint, like to get little peaks of it. There's nothing out there that can cause an exponential release of it in the brain, except for what is currently being studied now when someone is born and when someone dies. There's arguments around animal testing, because they can't test it on humans right now, that when you die, 5-MeO is, and various forms of DMT are released and flood the brain in the death experience, which is fascinating because many people who have the experience alluded to a form of ego death or a self death as part of the process. So there's interesting correlations there, but again, never done in human trials at this point yet.
Have you watched many of these near-death experience videos? People who are, recounting what they experienced, and it's like mind-blowing.
I mean, it's super fascinating, right? And I think it peaks on the question of what almost all of humanity has been asking. It's like, what happens when we die? And is death a thing, right? And again, depending on what you believe there. But yeah, there's an amazing threshold that can happen. What I'll say about 5-MeO and why it's an interesting molecule that sets itself apart from the other ones is most other psychedelic molecules, psilocybin, MDMA, even LSD, and NDMT, when it affects your brain, it floods the brain with content. So that could mean bringing up subconscious ideas and things that are stored in the mind. It can, in some cases, many people believe that NDMT opens you up because your brain is entropic. And so the entropy of your brain gets opened up a little bit. And so you start seeing other realms or dimensions or whatever terminology that you want to give to it. But it is a content flutter of the mind. 5-MeO, instead of bringing content, it dissolves all content. So all material content, so that which takes form, is dissolved, and all spiritual content, everything that doesn't take form. So multi-universe ideas, spiritual realms, dimensions, all of that also dissolves. And so what you're left with in the middle of the experience is nothing but pure awareness. And it's in that awareness, which many of the ancient traditions have been speaking of the God within, the witness consciousness, the non-dual understanding of where all content disappears and all that is left is just awareness. That is the experience that I had, which set me on the path of trying to explain what that meant and what that was. And to me, it's special because I believe all forms of suffering, personal suffering that is foundational to the misbelief that we are separated. Whether we're separated from God, separated from each other, separated from everything around us, it creates this sense of, oh, I'm separated and therefore I lack. And because I lack, I therefore need to find something to fill that lack. And we go on these crazy pursuits that we talked about earlier. So if separation is the cause of much suffering, then the antidote is understanding oneness or union or whatever term, witness conscious, whatever we want to term it. And 5-MeO is is the only molecule on the planet that can allow someone to have that experience near instantly. Again, not the only way to do it. And I don't suggest everybody go out and start looking for an experience. I mean, if you're called to it, great. But if you're not, don't. But I think that's why we put some extra bias emphasis on that, because unlike some of the other psychedelics and molecules on the planet, this truly does create an opportunity for all content of experience to dissolve, and all that is left at the core of it is you in pure awareness. And once you have an experience with that, life changes for you a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the Dispenza meditations, or maybe as many of them, is talking about you're becoming nobody in no time and no space with no thing.
Yes.
And is that what you're describing with that experience?
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, at a very accelerated and experiential way. So a great example of this is, so we facilitate these experiences weekly for people. And just this past week, we had a guy who had just come from a Dispenza experience. So they knew the idea, and I said, hey, I think Dispenza calls it touching the void, or calls it the void. And he was using this terminology. And I said, well, have you had that experience at the Dispenza event? And he said, yeah, I did. I said, okay, you're going to be very familiar with this. This is just going to take you there very quickly and to a depth that you haven't yet experienced. Are you okay with that? And he said, yes. And so he had the experience. And that was ultimately what he said at the end of it was, and the Dispenza meditation was 6 hours. And in those 6 hours, he touched there and he got there and he felt this nothingness, the void. With an experience with 5, he got there in about 10 seconds and to the depth times 100, and then came back and now was like, oh, that was just the same thing, but it was faster and deeper. So to your point, it is very much, again, I've never had a Dispenza experience, so I can't speak to it directly. I can just refer to someone who has had that experience. But in his words, it was very much the same thing, but faster and deeper. And that's why we call it an accelerant. I mean, it shouldn't be seen as a crutch or a dependent thing, but for many, and I'm not going to use this as an excuse, for many, meditating for 6 hours is not a feasible thing for them, daily. But having an experience that can show you how to get there a little bit faster is for some people. So it's all the same path and we're all going the same way. It's just the tools or the paths you choose to get there are obviously very personal.
Right. And you're putting on a 33-day challenge. I know we have to wrap up here, but let's give folks a URL so they could go there. We'll put it in the show notes as well, so they can sign up for that experience. And it's all virtual, and also whatever other resources you want to share and have them.
I thank you, Stephan. I really appreciate that. So, through this work, we've experienced, it is my current understanding that our experience of life is often predicated on whether or not we were able to deal with what I call the imprints that were left on a neural operating system or a nervous system. Our nervous system is this interface by which the pure awareness has an experience with the material world. It's kind of the interface in between. And so all of our outcomes and all of our internal experiences and how we view life and all of that in its purest form should be awareness, having an experience from the external world that comes in, has the experience and then relives it out, and it's pure and it's joy, and it's this wonderful improv class full of love, joy, peace, and all those beautiful things. However, sometimes life happens, and as life happens, we get these imprints, and these imprints are just unresolved things that happen from our past, which, how I define it, is they break the code a little bit in our neural operating system. There's just a line of code that makes things fuzzy. And over time, some of these codes stack on top of each other, and all of a sudden they manifest as anxiety or stress or whatever these things are. And so I spent the last 5 years of my life figuring out, what does that mean spiritually, and what does that mean from a neural perspective? And we've created this 30-day experience that we call Rewired. And that's really just some basic daily practice. See it like 75 hard for your soul. Basic daily practices that you can do for 30 days. And in doing so, they start to dissolve the power and the grip of the imprints, so you can start having a little bit more of that free flow experience. And so for that, unbecomingcourse.com. So unbecomingcourse.com/rewired is where you can go. Depending on when you hear that URL and when you get there, it'll either be a waitlist sign up, because we're about to launch in a few weeks, or if it's already live, then you can join anytime and you'll see the details on how to enroll in that. But it is completely free. It is everything I known and learned from all the lamas at the monastery in Nepal, all the way to the neuroscientists that are studying consciousness at Imperial College, combined into one 30-day daily practice that allows you to do that. And that's kind of what we're hoping that everyone gets a little touch and experience of. So again, unbecomingcourse.com/rewired is the URL. Thank you, Stephan, for letting me share that.
And the main site, unbecomingcourse.com, is where they would go for more information about the documentary, which is coming out when, do you think?
Yeah, so we are hoping for Q2 of 2026, so a few months away. Unbecomingcourse.com will show you some of the educational arm of what we have there, or unbecoming.movie will show you everything. You can watch the trailer, you can see what's going on, get all the updates of everything that's happening there. Yeah, it's exciting times. And again, depending on when someone's watching this or listening to this, the movie could already be out, and I hope you enjoyed it. And it fulfills everything that we've been trying to do in this last couple of years here.
Awesome. Well, congrats and good luck with the movie launch and the book that you're working on and all the amazing stuff that you're creating and putting out in the world. Yeah, kudos to you.
Stephan, I want to just express my deepest gratitude to you on so many levels for following the little intuition to give me an opportunity to share about some of the things that are going on in my life. Like I said, this is the first podcast I've ever been able to talk about this stuff, and for you being willing to be in this world now. I mean, similar. I mean, you had a marketing thing going on, and you're in this world too. And to just allow me to have a conversation with you about it, I express my highest levels of gratitude for the opportunity.
And thank you, listener. Thank you for being part of this journey with us and for being a light in the world. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off. If you want to hear more conversations like this about dissolving limiting beliefs, then I recommend episode 524 with Nicole Keekley, episode 526 with Mike Shabbat, and episode 529 with Derek Sivers. Also, I invite you to check out the show notes, transcript, action-based checklist, and all the URLs mentioned in this interview with Nicholas Kusmich at getyourselfoptimized.com/534. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share this episode and, more importantly, the entire show, Get Yourself Optimized, with a friend. Change your life and help me spread the light. Thank you.